Hi everyone, welcome back to the show. I have been waiting for the perfect excuse to talk about what we're going to talk about today, and two of Hollywood's favorite blondes just handed it to me on a silver platter. Of course, I'm talking about Sabrina Carpenter and Sydney Sweeney, who have been making headlines in the last couple of weeks and months for what we're going to discuss today, and coming from a more conservative culture in Sri Lanka, definitely compared to American standards. I think the whole issue and the broader topic that this involves itself in is something that is very interesting and necessary to be discussed. First, we have Sabrina Carpenter. Now, if you don't know who Sabrina Carpenter is, I kind of envy that in a way. But essentially, she is an actress turned singer who started her career out on Disney Channel. So she has been causing quite the stir on social media these days because she is in the process of teasing her new album, Man's Best Friend, with this cover here. And as soon as we see this, we understand it's definitely suggestive, and we kind of get the message being implied. Objectively speaking, she is really good at what she does. I've always thought she's had a really good sense of humor. That has also been the general consensus until this whole incident that came up. Next, we have Sydney Sweeney, who is also an American actress. Recently, she's partnered up with a men's soap company, but the issue began when she started selling bars of soap that were infused with her own bathwater. Again, we understand what is being implied here and the audience that these two things are catering to. So this caused a huge uproar on social media, especially because these two incidents took place relatively close to each other, and people have been sharing their thoughts and their opinions. There have been multiple different points of view on this. Some going as far as to say that these actions push back the progress women have made over the last 100 years. And certain points are valid, but others I did find a little contradictory, because it is the same type of thinking that calls out the actions of celebrities like these. That is also the type of thinking or ideology that empowers individuals that work in this type of promiscuous genre of industries, such as the sex work industry, and platforms that encourage this type of content, such as OnlyFans, for example, which is actually the heart of what we are going to talk about today. So, if you don't know what OnlyFans is, once again, congratulations. Kind of envy that. It's basically a platform that creators could upload exclusive content to that their fans could enjoy for a periodic subscription fee. And this could be anything like sneak peeks, behind the scenes, teasers, and you could upload anything from like cooking videos to educational content on this platform, right? Like it was meant for anything and everyone. But due to a lack of restrictions, in a sense, on this platform, and because of everything that went down after the pandemic and the digital shift that took place for us as a society, along with certain celebrity figures that started associating themselves with these platforms, it slowly became known for its adult content. And a key difference with this platform that often comes up in these discussions compared to the traditional porn industry is the fact that creators get to produce their own individual content. It may not seem like a major difference, but it is key in this whole discussion, which we will get to. So one of the biggest shifts that changed this approach to this platform was post-pandemic media and cultural conversation. So a lot of it finds intersections in fourth wave feminism, which we're not going to get too deep into. Maybe we can do a deep dive on that later if you're interested. But in the most simplistic terms, it kind of embraced the idea that women should control their own bodies and how they choose to express or monetize them, whether that was sexually or otherwise. So because platforms like this give creators the freedom to control their content, or at least the impression that they have that control, the people that chose to produce adult content on these platforms were kind of encouraged, affirmed, and empowered to do so. Essentially, this was meant to challenge the shame that was historically attached to the sex work industry, because most of the people that affirm this line of work believe that it flips the power dynamic, meaning that instead of being objectified without consent, which often happens online, creators had the choice to monetize their content on their own terms. But as always, there's a flip side to this, and there's also a group of people that are more on the lines of thinking that this train of thought reinforces objectification, commercializes intimacy, and can even put pressure on young women to sexualize themselves for profit under the guise of empowerment. I personally find myself more aligned with this idea because, as a silent observer on social media, I've started to notice certain patterns and shifts in how we interact with this industry that should warrant significant concern, especially when it comes to younger, more impressionable minds and their exposure to social media. So, when thinking about how this industry has kind of evolved, changed, and shifted over the last 20 to 30 years, I like to see it in three distinct eras. And in order to visualize that for you, I'm going to call them the classical, the Renaissance, and the modern era. So the classical era is the late 20th, early 21st century. So this is where the industry was looked down upon and engagement with the industry was also shunned, and at least in the general public. So there's like three main variables. So one is that it was not encouraged to create content for this industry. It was not something people wanted to be associated with, at least in public. And it was hard to access. Like, you would have to make an active effort to go and look for this type of content. There were no phones, no access to internet the way we have it today. You would either have to go and rent out a DVD, look for a magazine, or your parents' gigantic PC that was in the middle of the living room for everyone to see. This is like peak Playboy era. And basically there were barriers on all three fronts in terms of how to access it, the people consuming it, and the ones creating it. Cut to the Renaissance. Now, this is the era where the internet has come into play. Social media is also becoming a big part of society. And unlike the classical era, this content is becoming slightly more accessible. Maybe one Google search away, consume it under the radar without causing too much of a fuss. So there is a certain stereotype and stigma surrounding it, but maybe a little less than it was in the classical era. So it was coming to a point where it was becoming more normalized, in a sense. Cut to the modern era, post-COVID, post-pandemic. The way we interact on digital spaces took a complete 180. As a result, this industry started booming because of certain shifts in society, especially with certain movements like the feminist movement, particularly the modern variations of it, that, like I said, that embrace this idea that women should be in control of their own bodies, how they choose to express or monetize them, whether that be sexually or not. Essentially, again, challenging the stereotype and stigma that surrounded the industry that existed in the first two eras. Now you didn't need to go looking for this content. It came looking for you. Now, in reality, there's actually too much to discuss surrounding this issue and how it's affecting the world today. But I specifically want to talk about two things that are relevant to me and hopefully might be relevant to you. The first is in terms of how accessible this has become. Like I said, there was a time that this type of content had to be actively sought out, but now it needs to be actively evaded because now it quite literally comes looking for you. Especially, like I said, because this type of work is affirmed, encouraged. It's very easy to monetize for obvious reasons. It gets a lot of engagement, so naturally social media algorithms tend to push it out more as well. And sometimes it's not even just on social media. I use this website called WeTransfer for my work when I'm transferring larger files like illustrations or books that I'm working on. And I just opened this site up the other day to transfer a file, and I got like very suggestive content. So I've been thinking about this problem for a while. So in my mind, I know exactly the kind of message this sends and what it aims to achieve. But I am no longer a teenager. So what happens when younger minds are exposed to things like this? So what I've started to notice is with this modern era, there's a lot more individual creators out there. So this naturally causes a lot of competition. And with that competition has come a shift in marketing strategy as to how these creators try to push their content out there to stand out against the rest. A lot of these creators use a kind of like almost guerrilla style marketing where on their mainstream social media like Instagram or TikTok, they produce a lot of content that would be categorized as relatable comedy type of videos. And that's why I find this so concerning and necessary to talk about, because I am around kids pretty often and I've seen the kind of content that they engage with on social media. And they consume a lot of this like relatable, funny type of content. So in a way, I find it a little scary when I see these adult content creators producing this type of content, relatable comedy style content that appeals to the humor of kids in this age group, which is like tweens and early teenagers mostly. It creates this perfect series of events for youth to fall into consuming this kind of content, be exposed to it even without them or their parents even realizing it. How I see it is this, and you can let me know in the comments what your opinion on this is, because I'm not here to judge anyone. That's not what this channel is for, and who am I to judge? But I personally think from a consumer point of view that this type of content is not beneficial. I think it desensitizes young minds and creates very unrealistic standards that can be very harmful when at some point you try to pursue a meaningful, purposeful, and fulfilling relationship with a partner. And as an adult, you can do whatever you want with your life. But I do believe that minors need to be protected from this because they may not be able to fully comprehend or understand this or even be able to consent to consuming this content before they've gone too far down the rabbit hole. I'm not telling anyone how to raise their kids, but there are clear generational differences in how we have seen and experienced the adult film turned adult content style industries. Because no one has really, I have not seen anyone talk about it. These are purely observations that I've made by being on social media because it is a big part of my work and I've started to notice these patterns and shifts, more or less, that have taken place over the time that I've been on social media. Especially how my generation with Gen Z and now Gen Alpha interact with this type of content. So it's something I would encourage you to keep an eye out for so that you notice these patterns if it ever comes across your path. Because this is something that's constantly changing. Nothing is new under the sun, for sure. But the packaging it presents itself in often does seem to change over time. Next, we come to the actual creators. And I get that people have various reasons for wanting to be a part of this industry. But because of the empowerment and affirmation surrounding it in recent times, there's this narrative that has sort of come about where doing this type of thing is like, being your own boss. You get to set your own hours. Obviously, there's a lot of money involved in it, and it's as if you are your own CEO. So there is this growing trend, especially in the West, potentially here also, I may not be aware of it, where you find young girls, as soon as they turn 18, they want to become an OnlyFans creator. And this is not all cases, but certain popular cases I've seen, these are often girls that come from very affluent backgrounds, children of celebrities who are arguably not coming from what I would call struggling homes. It has become something that people want to involve themselves with out of choice, not due to a lack of them. And I would argue that while being in control of your own body is your basic human right, I feel like its role in this conversation has become a little bit misplaced. Because at the end of the day, it is an industry that is shaped by male-dominated consumer demand. Even if you have control over what you post, you are still catering to that eye and teaching them, almost training them to objectify you under the guise of empowerment. I also think it puts a lot of pressure on young girls to sexualize themselves because they may grow up seeing the sex work industry as something that is really accessible or celebrated or a great way to gain success, attention, or financial stability. Because when you really think about it, at least the way I see it, I believe that ultimately the only people that benefit from this whole thing are the platforms that have been able to monetize creators and consumers that engage in this type of interaction. Because the short-term effects on both creator and consumer may seem harmless, but we're looking at very harmful long-term effects, especially in today's society. And unfortunately or not, that seems to be the direction that the world is heading in. Now, this observation is largely reflective of Western society, but with things like social media and globalization, this ideology and train of thought is slowly starting to penetrate to societies like Sri Lanka. It's a very nuanced conversation, so of course, please share your thoughts below. We love healthy discussion. Younger generations are definitely influenced by Western pop culture and trends from makeup to music, so who's to say OnlyFans isn't too far behind? It might even be happening as we speak. And as an adult, you have the free will to do whatever you want with your life. God Himself has given you that freedom of choice. So again, feel free to share your thoughts. This is simply mine. My life is Jesus, so let me present it to you from the way I see it. Let's take a verse, Romans 12:2 from the Bible, which says, "Be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that ye may prove what is good, acceptable, and perfect will of God." So it says, be not conformed to this world. So I don't think you need to live by the narrative that the world has set out for you. And it's okay if you don't fit into that box, and you should never feel pressured to do so. As always, there is free will, and what you choose to do with that is completely up to you. But not everything you do might prove beneficial to you, or rather in alignment with what God has in store for you, because His plans, His ways are greater than what we could plan or perceive for our own lives. Because His plan is not just okay or subpar, it's a perfect one just for you. which also means it's different to everyone else's. So there is absolutely no point in trying to live like the rest of the world. So don't get caught to this facade, this rush to make a quick buck, or the kind of money that creators in this industry might, we perceive them to rather, because what you see on social media is never the full picture. There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes. And you should never also feel pressured to consume this type of content just because the world might be, or your friends might be as well. You never know what kind of doors you're opening, and you might be walking into dangerous territory. It's okay to walk a different path because there always is another path. You can break the norm, you can be the exception. Because there is a life for you in God's perfect will. And just like anything, He gives you the choice to choose that. So the choice is ultimately yours to decide where you want to go.